if anybody if anybody's listening to this from Winchester, really great to have you with us. This is the first one that we've been doing like this with Winchester involved. And it's just been really lovely to sort of have closer interactions with Winchester and learn a little bit and have that extra skill set coming in from the staff team there. Just a little bit of housekeeping as normal would be great. I think everybody's on mute. That's marvelous. We will be having quite a big section of this meeting for questions and answers after a couple of presentations and looking at a case study. So if you do want to put your questions into chat, we'll try and deal with those maybe even as we go along, but certainly at the end. And then obviously, people can come in, put hands up, or just chipping in with actual questions as they arise later on in the meeting. Really grateful as well for Margaret joining us from Fareham, who's going to be sharing a little bit with us later about their experiences with infrared. For those of you who don't know other key people online in terms of staff, we've got Martin from Guildford, Matt from Portsmouth. Matt works particularly on the comms side, and we're working very, very closely with him now across the three dioceses. Gareth is helps us out in Chichester as well, so great to have him there. So those are the local contacts for whichever diocese you are in. I think that's everything I have to say at this point. So I'm going to pass straight over to Martin, who's going to be leading us just through this next section.
Thank you very much, Steve. It's good to be with everyone today. I am just sharing my screen and I will start the presentation. Where do I need to click here? There we are, presentation from the start. Lovely. Can you all see that? Yes, I can see a thumbs up there. So my name's Martin Carr. I'm the Net Zero Project Officer in Guildford Diocese, but it's nice to be here sharing with people from Portsmouth, Chichester and Winchester too. If you were with us back before the summer, I think it was back in June, we had the first of our webinars looking at church heating, and Matt Fulford talked about the principles of heating our churches and then went on to talk particularly about heat pump technology and how that could work in certain church spaces. If you weren't able to join us for that webinar, you can find the link and the recording through the webinar page, which is on the Portsmouth Net Zero website. So what we're going to do in this webinar is just continue the theme of church heating, looking at where other technologies, not heat pumps, might be useful, and what those technologies are and where we might employ them. So what I'd like to do is differentiate space heating, heating the space, the air, from heat the people, what we call heat the people approaches. I'd like to link those two different approaches to heating to the patterns of use in our buildings, highlight the technologies which might heat us in churches, and then give some examples. And as already been said, we're going to hear a really good example following my presentation from Fareham. So the first approach to heating, which Matt talked about in June, is a heat the space approach. And we're very used to heating the space because a lot of our churches are already heated either by gas boilers or oil boilers. The principle there being that the air in the church is warmer than the air outside. So when we walk into church, it's nice and warm and cozy. So that might be by means of very traditional radiators. We've all, of course, got radiators in our homes as well. And although they're called radiators, that's actually a slight misnomer because most of the heat, they do radiate heat onto us, but most of the heat from radiators actually reaches us by convection. So the radiators heat the air, which is in contact with them, and then the air moves around the room, and slowly the room warms up. Another way of getting heat into the air in a building is using air under floor heating. So instead of heat coming from radiators, which might be positioned peripherally or in various places throughout the building, the heat is generated under the floor, and where the air is in contact with the floor, it becomes warmer, and then, of course, as we know, hot air rises and fills the whole of our space. The way air conditioning works is that various units which are powered by a heat pump, whether in the ceiling or wall mounted or floor mounted, push they harvest warmth from the outside air, bring that into the building, and then push that into the air within the building, again creating a warm space, warm air in the building, so that as we move around the space, we feel warm because the air in the building is warm. I mean, it's a very traditional, very good way of heating a building. But of course, with very large buildings, and many churches are huge, it can be a slightly inefficient and slow process to warm up such a large volume of air using convection. Great if we've got a well-insulated building, because any heat we put into the space is retained within the space. And great if we're using the building frequently, because the heat we put in is worth it. Many people who are using the space, groups, we're using it for church services and so on, are benefiting from the warmth we've put in. So that's heating the space. But there is another way we can heat our churches, which is to heat the people. Now, on the right there, you can see a chandelier heater. I think that one is a shadow heater, and infrared, rather than heating the air, mainly heats it's radiation, so it heats anything it comes into contact with. It's the radiation from an infrared heater. It would heat us if we were standing underneath it. It might heat the floor or furniture which is positioned nearby. It does actually heat the air as well a little bit, and over time the air would warm up, but that's not the primary purpose of it. But heat the people approaches aren't confined to radiative heating using infrared. We could also use under pew heaters, and I've put there, underfloor. I'll mention that in a moment. But an under pew heater, if we have the luxury of having pews in our church, are small bars which fit under the pews, and in a way they are like radiators. They provide they're electrically powered, and they provide heat to the space under the pew, and hot air rises, so as the warm air rises from under the pew towards us, we feel warm. I was at Holy Trinity West End, which is in Guildford Diocese, just last week, and they've got heaters under all the pews there. We were treated to a demonstration. We sat in the pews, the heaters were turned on, and within 5 to 10 minutes, we could feel the lovely warmth rising past us. And again, it's convection, because the heater's heating the air, but the air isn't peripheral, or it isn't going up straight into the roof space. It's where we are sitting. We're heating the people, we're heating us, and particularly good if perhaps the building is only being used once or twice a week, because the heat can be delivered quickly to where it's needed, where people are sitting, and therefore we're not needing to heat the air in the whole building, just to heat those who are attending the service or the event. Now, I've also put that we could think of underfloor in some circumstances as a heat the people technology, because rather than the heat being generated in radiators and going up the sides of the building and into the roof space, underfloor heating does actually heat the space directly underneath us. So the heat rises past us and warms us directly. Another very kind of, in some sense, quite primitive way of heating people is to use heated cushions. We're quite used to that if we've got a heated seat in our car, and heated cushions perform much the same function. They're warm, and so if the building is cold, we're sitting on a nice, warm, comfy cushion or backrest, and they keep us warm while we're sitting there. So Infrared is heating us using radiation. Pub gardens are perhaps the most crude example, where that kind of rather harsh red light keeps us warm on a cold day. But are many technologies in churches as well, which are perhaps gentler and more appropriate for heating us and heating events going on in church, or localized convective heating, which under pew or heated cushions would be an example of. So I said at the beginning, one of the main things we need to get right is the pattern of use of our church. If we have smaller and well insulated and well used space, perhaps a community centre or a church hall, or indeed a church building which has been converted for community use, and work has been done to kind of exclude drafts and insulate it well, then a heat the space approach might well work. So a heat pump might be the most appropriate solution. But there are many churches, as we know, some of which are very large. So any heat we put in generally is going to go upwards towards the roof. If it's a poorly insulated and historic building where putting in additional insulation is going to be challenging, it might be simply going out the building again. So or indeed churches where if we're only having a few events in a week, perhaps a Sunday service and a couple of meetings, no matter how well insulated we make the building, the heat we put in is going to escape before the next thing happens in the building. So in those situations, sorry, I just need to turn off something there. In those situations, it might be better to heat people in the church rather than trying to heat the whole space. So the solutions mentioned under pew, infrared or heated cushions might be useful. In those situations, we don't need to insulate the whole building because we're delivering heat to where people are for short periods. Just to the right there, you can see a picture of a very nice under pew heater. That's from Electric Heating Solutions, and that's very similar to the type that I found at Holy Trinity West End. And indeed, they are being installed across dioceses, across the country, so very effective indeed. So let's look at infrared heating, and the happy looking people on the right there are the church warden George and operations manager Michelle at St. Paul's Church in Newark. If you can see above their head and above the window, there's a sort of rectangular bar, and that's an infrared heater. Those go all the way around the church and are arranged in zones so they can be turned on in the areas of the church which need heating. When you turn them on, immediately you feel warm. Again, think of those pub gardens where the heater is turned on and immediately you get a warm glow. But because they interact not only with us, people, but with all the surfaces in the church, so the floor, furniture, and so on, as time goes on, the building itself begins to warm up. And I mean, it is just autumn, not winter, but when Steve and I were at Newark on Friday and the heaters were turned on, the building warmed from 15 to 19 degrees in only about a quarter of an hour. So it was quite a good warm up time there. Useful, I think. Newark is not used constantly. It's used infrequently. They have Sunday services, worship, and also some children's groups. And so ideal, it can be turned on in the areas of the church which are being used. It can be turned on only at the times where it's needed. And we're not trying to heat the whole space with the problems there of trying to insulate the whole building. Compared to a heat pump, the cost of infrared is generally a little bit lower, I think, particularly this sort of infrared heater, and perhaps not your loveliest chandelier, heated chandeliers, but these kind of bar heaters are reasonably cost effective and reasonably fit well into various architectural styles of church. And as I say, they can be zoned. So if you're having a service perhaps just in the sanctuary, you would turn on only those heaters. If you're using the whole building can come on, and perhaps you can have them separately in meeting rooms or community spaces within the building. So again, you're just turning on what you need. What are the disadvantages of infrared heating? Well, generally you will need to have three-phase electricity because they're quite hungry for electricity. Now, if you've already got a three-phase supply to your church, congratulations, off you go. But at Nork, they needed to get UK Power Networks in to upgrade their electricity supply. That cost them £9,000 and quite a lot of digging. You can see the channel there to route the three-phase supply into the church. But they got there, they did it, and it was a good upgrade. And it now is a suitable supply to power the heating. Infrared can have quite high running costs because it uses quite a lot of electricity. Now you can balance that, of course, against if you're only using it infrequently or you're using it in a zoned way. Or perhaps you're able to install solar PV as well to make some of the energy that you need. But it can have high running costs if you're using it a lot. And in terms of comfort, again, it's probably most comfortable if you're using it for shorter periods, for an hour or less. Sitting under these heaters for a long time, it doesn't have the sort of the same thermal comfort as convective space heating does. So now let's have a look at the people technology, which is in common use, which is under pew. This is actually a picture from Holy Trinity West End. You see as well, by the way, as the under pew heater, they've got a nice warm cushion on the seat as well, which gives a certain amount of psychological benefit in terms of comfort. So the heat is delivered directly to where the users are, in this case the congregation. The heat is fairly instant within 5 minutes of sitting in the pew and the heater being turned on. We were feeling nice and warm. At Holy Trinity, they actually still have only a one-phase supply, so they were able to get their heaters in just on the one-phase electricity supply. Three-phase would be better for them because they're more or less at capacity with one phase. They might put that in the future, but for now they're able to heat the church using just one phase of electricity. Again, it's zoned, so if there are a small service, perhaps an 8 a.m. service with just a handful of people, only the heaters in the areas being used can be turned on. But there are heaters under all the pews, so potentially they can heat the whole church. Now it heats you. It does heat people. It's localized, but of course, if you've got it on for a long time, then eventually starts warming the air in the church, and the space itself starts to become warmer. Those are the advantages of under pew heating. Are there any disadvantages of under pew heating? Well, yes, they are. So it's convective. I've put that it has a lower thermal comfort because one of the things they've noticed at West End is it feels very nice while you're sitting in the pew, but when you stand up to sing a hymn, if you feel quite cold because you've moved up and you've moved away from where the heat is being generated. That becomes less as time goes on and the heaters are on because the air starts to warm up. But certainly at the beginning, you have less thermal comfort. The heat is only in the little tiny area that you're sitting, and it isn't in the wider building. So if you walked away from your pew to go to the toilet or make a cup of coffee or something, you'd probably feel cold in that space. Again, high running costs because electricity is still in the UK more expensive than gas, and you're using quite a lot of it in one go. And of course, the main problem with under pew heating is lots of churches now don't have pews because we've changed our churches to have chairs or to have flexible spaces, which are useful for community events and so on. So this is a technology which is very good for perhaps more traditionally ordered churches, churches where which are just used for worship, and occasional officers' baptisms, weddings, and so on. But very effective technology in those settings. Now, just a word about heated cushions. Again, there's a picture there of some cushions applied to chairs. So here we've got over the problem with the pews. We can actually use them on chairs as well. And a bit like your heated car seat, they warm you where you are. So perhaps a small number of people are attending your church or a particular service in your church. Everyone can have a cushion. Great, they're nice and warm. They're very low cost. I know there are now church cushion companies available, but actually you can probably go to a DIY shop and buy something, which would work as well. I used to work in a church where we had the heating on because there was a volunteer who church watched during the day, and it was, oh, the volunteer must be, but I mean, how inefficient is that to warm the whole building for one person? So if perhaps there's a church watcher or a church sitter or someone working in the office, that's another, perhaps they could have a warm cushion which would keep them warm without feeling you need to heat the whole building just for that one or couple of people. Vulnerable people, perhaps more elderly people or people with special needs might benefit, even if the church is being warmed slightly from the additional heat that comes from a heated cushion. And some churches I know as well use blankets, which perhaps keep you extra warm as well. Cheap and flexible, a good option for your church, though perhaps not if you're using it extensively or regularly. So just finally, how would we go about the process of knowing what sort of heating is right for us? Because that's in a way the first question, and we need to know the answer to that before we can go any further. Well, start with what do we have now? Does it work? And what do we want a new heating system to do? Now that might seem an obvious question. We want a heating system to keep us warm. But are people moving around the building? Are people sitting down in the building? What temperature do we want to be warmed to? Are people mainly sitting or are they mainly there for physical activity? In which case, temperatures could be a little bit lower. So think about your needs. Think about, are there small services, large events in the church? How often are different things happening? And if you haven't already had an energy audit's a really good way to find out what might be appropriate. Thinking about, is our church used 7 days a week, one day a week, for large groups, for small groups, for community activities, for worship, and so on. And then we've got an idea of what might be most appropriate, whether that's a heat the people approach or whether it's a space heating approach. Moving on from there, obviously, if we have a fairly simple building, perhaps some pews, and we think, yes, under pew heating would be great, then we can go to a company, we can get them to come in, we can look at what's needed, and then get it installed. But if we've got a very complicated building, a very large church or church which has multiple uses, we might think of bringing in a consultant who could do some study of again, patterns of use, of heat loss, of what might be appropriate. It might be that a number of different heating systems could be employed in parallel with each other to heat the various things that are going on in the church. And then once we've got an idea of what it is we need, and that's really important, then we can go to the companies and say, actually, can you install infrared or under pew or a heat pump for us? We perhaps don't want to leap straight to the companies, because if you go to a heat pump company, they're obviously going to say, yeah, heat pump's a good idea. So we need to kind of get that idea. What do we need before we go further on? If we are approaching a company to come and work in our church to install under pew infrared heat pump and so on, all of us here at in the Net Zero teams have knowledge of companies that will do that. It's really good if you can get a company that has experience in church and heritage environments. They'll just understand what will work in your building. They'll understand the faculty and planning requirements. And indeed, they'll understand, hopefully, what people in church are looking for. So I think that's all I wanted to say in terms of church heating. Just a final slide there, and these slides will be put up on the website afterwards. In terms of if we need further support or help with our projects, get our newsletter, look at our website. The next webinar is on solar photovoltaic on the 29th of October. And then I've popped the emails for the 4 dioceses there, so you can get in touch if you've got any questions. I've just rattled on for a few minutes, and I think it's time for me to stop and hand over to Matt and Margaret.
Thank you, Martin. That's really informative, really loads of stuff to get our heads around there. So what we're going to look at now is a church in the Portsmouth diocese that has had the halo heaters installed. I'm going to play a short video, about 4.5 minutes, and then I'm going to speak to Margaret, who is the church warden of the church in the case study, and we're going to ask a few questions and find out a little about the whole process of how they got those heaters installed and why they came to choose that kind of thing. Let me just first play you the video.
This is the church of St. Peter and St. Paul in Fareham, Hampshire. But what you see outside is deceptive. It's an old building, but inside there's something much more modern going on. So behind me you can see a series of 8 chandeliers mounted in the arches down the nave. They look like they're part of the furniture of the building, but in reality they're brand new. They're state-of-the-art infrared heating systems designed to heat this building and to hold the heat within it so that the people in the congregation are nice and warm. Each chandelier is made up of 12 infrared ceramic elements. Now, each element will heat up to quite an impressive 500 or 600 degrees. This is about 4.3 meters off the ground, and it's going to heat a space underneath of maybe 5.5 meters wide. When you put in infrared, you can turn on the particular units and heat the areas of the church that you want. With an old-fashioned boiler-based system, most churches will recognise that they have to come in maybe even the day before or the night before to turn the heating on so that overnight it gets up to some sort of temperature. With this type of system, we're looking at maybe 20 minutes to 45 minutes maximum. And that gives, again, an enormous energy saving. Each chandelier has its own control system. Now, in this instance, we've got one controller for each of the chandeliers, and we can configure it however you like. So we could have one button controls the whole church, or each chandelier can have its own button, and we can turn them individually. So we're now in the Lady Chapel, and above me we've got one of the chandeliers. It's turned on, as you can see, and the lights are on as well. When we came in, it was freezing cold. The heater's been on for about 45 minutes, and already it's really, really warm.
So this Lady Chapel would have been the part of the church that was recorded in the Domesday Book. So it's Norman, but there was a Saxon foundation.
So this grate here, is this the earlier heating system?
So this would have been part of the original heating. It's very typical of churches of certainly this area.
So this had what? Hot pipes running underneath it?
My name is Holly. I'm the Buildings Project Manager with the Diocese of Portsmouth, and my background is particularly in architectural history and particularly in English churches. So St Peter and St Paul's Fareham, where we are now, is a Grade 2 star listed building. It's a major parish within the Church of England. The oldest parts of the building are in the Lady Chapel, and they are Norman. It was a different form of heating. It was something that we were not familiar with at first, but we've been really impressed, not only with the heating, but also the lighting system as well.
Using a drone with a thermal camera, we can actually see the heat that's generated from the chandeliers. We can see it in the way that's heated the surfaces underneath it, especially the pews, which of course is where everybody is sitting. And that's demonstrated by the different colours within the pictures you can see, and the brighter the colour, the hotter the surface. Under the chandeliers, they've been turned on for about 40 minutes, and the heat that's coming down from them is quite substantial. It's radiating over this whole area, and I can even feel on the surfaces beneath my hands, they're really warm. Using a system like this, it means you have almost instantaneous heat. You turn it on within 5 or 10 minutes. It's difficult to explain to a camera, but the heat effect here, the warmth, is actually quite substantial.
So you can really feel the effect of the heating system in the Lady Chapel. We're obviously in a slightly smaller space, and you can also see the impact of the lighting system that really blends in well and gives this lovely soft light. So we're incredibly pleased with how the shadow chandeliers work within this space. We love the design. It's very in keeping with the architectural history of the church. It's very respectful of the space.
So there we have it. If you'd like your church to benefit from a system like this, get in touch with us. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
There we go. Let me just make sure that is properly turned off. There we are. So I'd like to introduce to you Margaret, who is the church warden at St. Peter's and St. Paul's in Fareham, the church that we just saw there. And Margaret was involved with the whole process of installing the halo heaters. And so just to kind of close up this case study section, it'd be great to hear from you, Margaret, about your experience overseeing that process of being involved. First of all, what was it that led you to choose halo heaters over pew heaters? Because you've got pews in your church, beautiful wide open space inside the church. What made you choose halo heaters instead of under pew heaters?
I think initially the main decision was because we're a very small congregation, but like a lot of congregations, very spread out. So we kind of take over the whole church almost, but very, very spread out. So we didn't think, the under the pew ones were the ideal for us. So this seemed the ideal situation for us and solution, both short term with our current congregation, but we're also very mindful that there are big plans to change the use of the church with a plant coming in. So that absolutely fitted in with that. Ideally, we could have specific areas heated for the current congregation, but also when the church is absolutely full, it would optimize them to the full at that point.
Fantastic. So the whole process, or from beginning to end, how was that? How long did that take? And what kind of challenges did you encounter going along that journey?
I think, to be fair, the DAC, David handled a great deal of it for us and did a lot of negotiations. I think probably one of the biggest difficulties we had is persuading our congregation to make the change. The heating that we replaced was actually chandeliers, but half the capacity and half the size. For instance, there are 12 elements to each chandelier here, but the previous system there was just 6. So they knew that we needed to increase, but there was some resistance to that. But the process was fairly straightforward. There were a number of little sort of quite major glitches along the way, actually. But Shadow and David and I really negotiated those remarkably well. Yeah, quite simple, really. One of the major changes was the height that these chandeliers had to be higher than the previous ones. So though the company had sent down 2 engineers to dismantle it and look at the bolts and everything for the weight bearing potential, which was absolutely fine. They also replaced them because there was going to be a 2-week delay and a 2 Sunday delay. And I said, no, we couldn't be without lighting, for instance, for 2 weeks. But with the Lady Chapel, what we hadn't foreseen was actually we had to have another structure built in with more timbers built in, so it actually raised it. But again, that was done.
Fantastic.
So it was all quite effective, yes.
And so you mentioned that the previous chandelier heating had 6 elements. You've now gone up to much better halo heating with 12. Yes. What have you seen in terms of your electrical usage and your energy cost? Has that made a difference? I imagine you haven't used it a great deal so far this year because we're only just about to enter into the cold season. But have you noticed any differences yet?
No, you're absolutely right, because in fact it was just installed just before Easter. So we haven't really used it to its full potential. So I did check with our treasurer, and there certainly seems some slight reduction in costs, but there are other important factors to consider as well, sort of with external usage in the hall, for instance. So, but the early indicators are that there is a reduction in cost.
That's really great. And so you now have a church that has halo heaters. How are your church feeling about it now? Are they more accepting of it?
Well, it's an interesting one because, again, it's predominantly an elderly congregation, like most church congregations are, alas. And there's something about this heating that if you don't see it, you don't feel it. So the biggest transition and the sort of the educational role for our congregation has been to understand that it's a bit like radiators. You don't have to see the heat to recognize that it's there. So that's been the major difficulty. But yes, they're certainly coming round to it now. And we haven't used it very much, but on the odd time that we have used it, it's like Steve from Shadow said. I go in and put it on, and then certainly by the time people arrive, I've already turned it down. There are 4 settings, and I've already turned it down, probably to the second setting. And then I usually switch to the lowest setting for the service. I've only had to do that a couple of times, but you can certainly feel the heat.
Yeah.
There is an area where you do need to educate your people because, like a lot of churches, our people come in, like a lot of church congregations, there's a lot of individuals that perch at the end of the pew. And though Steve correctly says it does radiate out for about 5 meters, the closer you get, obviously, the warmer you're going to get.
Sure.
So I anticipate that as the colder weather draws nearer, the congregation will probably sort of start going in a bit further in from the
They end
centre
up
aisle
sitting
so they can
closer
get warm.
together. They get to know each other more.
Absolutely, yes.
That's fantastic. Gareth has asked a question, and if you're okay with sharing this, what were the installation costs for the Halo heaters, and did you already have 3-phase power, or did you have to have that installed as part of the process?
No, we did already have that, but it's difficult to say what the costs were because I have to be open and honest with you and say that David negotiated a substantial deal for us on the basis that we, of course, were a kind of show church, and we have had an enormous number. I think it's certainly more than 25 groups of churches come down to actually see us. So that was part of the deal. I think the initial cost should have been sort of round about 54,000. But yes, we had it substantially less than that,
That's
on
fantastic.
condition that we would be a good sales team.
Yes. Well, if anyone has any other questions, if you could ask them really quickly, because we've got to let Margaret go. She's got to get on and take a service in her church in a few minutes' time. So if anyone has a question, feel free to drop it into the chat box now. But otherwise, I'm going to hand over to Steve.
Can I just raise one point?
Yes,
Can I
please
just
do.
And I just throw this out for consideration. We actually used the electricians from the company that the company recommended to install. We were one of the first that they'd installed. So that obviously there were problems in the beginning. There've been a number of snagging issues. They've responded phenomenally quickly.
Yeah.
I've got no. In fact, they were down last week. They've responded incredibly quickly. And we anticipated there would be early snagging problems. The electricians were from London. So a couple of churches have come in and said about having their own electricians. So anyone considering having this installation, that's something really worth thinking about. Obviously, because you will have the local electrician. I had to have an electrician into the church yesterday for something else, and we talked about that, how he would, now take the ongoing responsibility. Not that we're anticipating any problems at all, but that's the only thing that I would suggest. There might be a dialogue about.
Yeah.
But we're very happy with them, and I would certainly encourage any of you considering it to either come to us and have a look, or whatever you want to do. But we're very happy.
Thank you. Just a question here from Gordon, who's just asking about the power consumption. Do you know how much power they use when they're on?
I wouldn't know that without
okay.
going through to our
That's
treasurer.
fine.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. Maybe we can put those details out at a later time.
Yeah, yes, sorry, I can check.
That's fine.
Yes.
Don't worry. Thank you so much, Margaret, for joining us and for sharing your journey. It's a real pleasure.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
Steve,
Bye.
it's over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Margaret. Yeah, and just coming back on that power consumption, we're gradually sort of getting up quite a few case studies of these now. And sorry, no, it's a question about cost. So I'm just in the process of writing up a case study from Wolverton, which is down towards Chichester, and their total cost was around about £48,000, and that included they did actually have three-phase already. They had two of the actual Herschel, different supplier, Herschel chandeliers, and then I think it was around about 8 or so of the smaller bar infrared heaters. But yeah, so that was coming out around about £48,000. So it very much sort of varies, because quite often I think churches are throwing in some of the extra sort of bar heaters for some of those areas where chandeliers don't work. But we'll be building up this sort of bank of case studies. So we've got the one at Fareham, we've got two down near Chichester and Bognor at the moment, hopefully in Hurst Pierpont up near sort of Burgess Hill sort of way. We'll be getting another one in the autumn, and then various examples of as well, like Nork, which is the
I've
bars.
just dropped Nork into the chat there, so people
Yeah.
can see that one, but the other ones we can circulate, obviously.
Yeah. We aren't many on the call, but I'm going to try and anticipate some of the questions that might be asked by people who are watching afterwards. But just at the moment, any other questions just now?
So Howard is asking, what is the power supply requirement for heated cushions? Do they need to be plugged in to separate 13 amp supplies?
I think there's a wide range of cushions, because there's some which are just battery powered. You can charge them up beforehand and you can put in. Again, I'm aware of the heated cushions across at Grapham, where they didn't have to go up to three-phase. They managed to get it in without three-phase. That's a fairly small church. But again, each pew cushion was actually, you could control that separately as well. And Gareth, you did, was it Ringamer again? I can't remember how many cushions they had, but did they have to go up to three-phase there?
No, they didn't need to change. They were able to keep their single phase supply. I think in general, because pew cushions use a very small level of power, you usually don't need three phase. So in our church here, we looked at it and we didn't need three phase. We could do it all on single phase. We did consider pew cushions. But one additional comment, actually, sort of related. You can have a combination of these technologies. So we're looking at a combination of under pew heaters and some wall-mounted infrared heaters in our church to change from an oil-fired boiler radiator system, because that seems to be the most appropriate combination. So you can mix and match these things, and as Martin said, really, it's a good idea to get somebody in to see, an expert really, to see what the best combination is in your particular church and what the most appropriate heating, combination might be.
I think my underlying query was if you've got mains powered cushions, you're going to end up with a rat's nest of wiring in a church full of individual seats which are moved after the service. So that would not be entirely practical. The battery powered ones, I presume you could set up a rack where people could grab a charged cushion on entry should they need it.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think the larger the cushions, unless you've just got a few pre-charged ones, I think it's the pew ones that are best. And again, obviously you want to hide the cables away so that people aren't tripping them and you don't have issues, particularly if it's a listed building.
Well, it's a listed building with no pews and movable chairs which get moved clear after the service, so that may not be entirely practical. And I was a little concerned with some of the infrared stuff, as St Paul's is an entirely timber-framed Norwegian-style church, and local heating may not be entirely desirable on the framework. Thank you.
I think just to say, one of the things we're really hoping to be able to do across the 3, maybe 4 dioceses, beginning sort of over this winter, is to have a few open mornings where churches who like Nork, the one that I was talking about Warburton, and others can actually invite people in to feel and experience it. And I think that conversation around the user journey is really important to be asking as well. Yeah, so I think with the cushions, it was very interesting when I did the case study at Grafham, because what they were saying there is some people found the cushions too hot. So they were giving out blankets for people to actually fold up and sit on for insulation, so they weren't feeling the heat. Others found them too cold. It wasn't hot enough. So maybe, you know, they were feeling it around their neck, or for me, I would feel it, you know, cold on my feet. So again, it's that sort of how you're helping people to adapt. And but that was just a single, it wasn't that sort of mosaic of different types of heating.
I think it's worth saying that at West End they had a similar thing, that if you got too hot, each pew had its own control, so you could actually turn the heating off again if you were feeling too hot, which is, as you say, helpful. But I mean, it's the same even with back to gas radiators. You sit close to them or you sit far away from them, depending on your body temperature.
So I think what we can do probably, Martin, is we can actually sort of whether it's grouping it in the website or through emails when we're sharing the recording to this, we can share the case studies that we've got so far.
Absolutely. Can I just comment on Gordon's question about power supply? Because
Oh,
I
yes,
think it's
sorry.
quite interesting. The next webinar does lead to the next webinar, which is about photovoltaics. But yes, absolutely, batteries, I think now, if you're getting photovoltaics, batteries are a really, really good idea because they can store up energy for use when you need them. So if you're having you know, a surge of use when your infrared or your under pews are on, then you've already got the energy, or some of the energy at least, stored up by sunshine from previous days. And yes, again, this thing about off-peak electricity is going to become more important as we move forward, I think, because solar power, wind power produce rather infrequent electricity. So if we can use electricity at off-peak times, store that in our batteries, and then use it when we need to, it's a great way forward in terms of balancing production and use of electricity, and also saving money.
Ben is asking a question: do we pay VAT on new heating systems?
I'm smiling there because we're having big debates about that at the moment. We've got a demonstrator project down in Chichester, which has an overall budget for a reordering, which is mainly focused on sort of different heating options. It's somewhere around about, the heating element is somewhere around about sort of £500,000. So VAT on that, you know, is a substantial amount. And I think what we're finding is that with the end of the listed places of worship scheme, there's quite a lot of uncertainty about VAT. I think it's clear on things like the heat pumps themselves and on solar panels, but there's a lot of it's not clear in terms of you know, the heating, the actual sort of, you know, electric heaters and all those sort of ancillary things, or the things that are sort of grey areas around all these technologies as well. We are having a big push to get the national church to work with HMRC to get some clearer advice on this, because the problem is if you have a contractor who says, yes, this is, you know, we don't charge VAT on this, it's a certificate, you know, it's a little bit like what do you call it, the self-assessments. So if their case gets called in by HMRC further down the line, you'll probably find it in the small print that if they haven't charged you VAT and now they're being told they should, they'll claim it back from you. But the problem is everybody is willing to, you know, PricewaterhouseCoopers, others, they're willing to give advice on specific cases, but not in a way that can be sort of used in other cases that are slightly different as well. So I think, you know, thinking across the national church over the next few years, you know, we could potentially, by giving more clarity on this, we could potentially be saving £10 million So it's worth investing in some really good advice.
And I
so
think
sorry, Ben, I haven't given you a clear answer, but that's sort of where we are at the moment.
I think
that makes me feel better for not being sure.
Can I just say again, it goes to my point about using a trusted supplier, so
Yeah.
Shadow or Herschel, or in terms of under pew electric heating solutions, or in terms of lighting, CES, they'll know what their protocols are for VAT, so they'll have very clear guidelines on that. It is harder if perhaps you're bringing in a supplier who doesn't understand the rules so well.
Great. I think the other thing as well as actually being able to share examples with you, we will be building up a bank of people who, you know, are the suppliers, the installers. As diocese, we can't make recommendations, but we can say these folks were used in Parish X, have a chat with them, find out about their experiences. And these halo chandelier heaters now, we used to just have really one supplier of that, but now we've got Herschel and Shadow, so a good little bit of competition there. And others, like the company that was used at West End near Bisley, where, you know, we've seen what they've done. You've got a church that can speak about them. And so, you know, we're beginning to sort of build up that bank of people we can point you to. Yeah, and the same with consultants as well. Some of the heating needs and options appraisals to go down into the more of the detail. We're working out how to write up specs for that, so we can share those with you, and gradually, slowly building up a bank of consultants who are actually going through some quite rigorous tender assessment processes where we're involving the national church to help us from a technical point of view in selecting good consultants. Great. Just aware of time, I think we will probably leave it there. I just want to refer again to our upcoming webinars. As Martin said, we've got the one on the 29th of October looking at photovoltaic, solar. I think what we might do is not, as well as just having that about, you know, the systems, the physical systems themselves and how they're working, we potentially could be inviting somebody along from a community solar cooperative, because there's been some interesting case studies where these co-ops have put them on the roofs, they own them, but it's this win-win for churches in terms of how it works for them. So we've got case studies we can share on that. We can get the people in for that. And the other case webinar later on this year is on the 26th of November, and this really ties in to Howard's fears about sort of risks and insurance. We're getting ecclesiastical to come along and talk around insuring, particularly around the risks we face as climate change and all the phenomenon we're having with weather cuts in, but I'm sure they'll be able to answer questions as well on what they are looking for as managers of risks, basically, in terms of different systems as well. So it'd be really great to see you there. We'll get the comms out to remind you well ahead of those meetings. Great. So I think we will close there, and thank you for everybody joining us today on the day, and hope that people who are joining afterwards as well find this useful as well. Thank you very much.